Hey, welcome everybody. Okay, first things first, let me apologize for my hair today. It's the Michael Bolton circa 1976 look, or not, I guess more like the 87 look. Yeah, give or take. Unfortunately, my landlord, for some strange reason, has basically demolished all the outlets and all the bathrooms. There's some wiring problems, and so I wasn't able to style it or blow dry it. So this is the all-natural perm look. So I'm going for the Michael Bolton. Yeah, we're going to go with 1987 circa, give or take. So get that out of the way. Anyways, let me give you a backstory on this. In one of the Facebook groups that I'm in, one of the moderators had responded to something that I put out, like, look, if you have something that you want me to review or talk about, let me know. And this was a video that was linked to me, or at least they noted the title, and then I went to go find it. And I've seen other people do reviews on it. I haven't watched them yet. I did go over to Rationality Rules. I started watching it, but very quickly I was like, no, you know what? I'm not going to watch this video. I'm going to do this review without watching other people's to kind of give my own take on it, right? But I am using the same hashtag that he used, Priest. But I didn't watch his video. I just saw bits and pieces, and I wasn't going to sit through the whole thing. So I'm assuming that he did pretty well. We tend to agree on a lot of things when it comes to morality. We disagree fundamentally when it comes to axiological things, when it comes to terminology. But all in all, I think that we have a lot of similarities when it comes to morality, I think. I could be wrong on that. He may have changed his positions. But morality is a very difficult topic. It is second, in my opinion, in philosophy to philosophy of mind. It is a very difficult topic to talk about. Don't expect that this is going to be perfect. Don't expect that I'm not going to make mistakes. Don't expect to take everything I say absolutely. Take it with a grain of salt. I'm going to do my best to kind of give you my view of this particular video and my view of moral philosophy, or at least how I understand it, and then my particular positions and why. But this was a video from supposedly a priest called An Open Letter to Atheist from a Priest. It was from April 28th, 2021, has about 80,000 views. And I know that Joe from Answers and Reason, him and Dave did a video on it. I have not watched that video either. I will probably watch that on my bucket list. I do tend to get to videos, but they do take me a while to get to. But I have a whole bunch of tabs open, and I usually get to them at some point. So this video, I guess, in a nutshell, it's not a long video. It's only 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 39 seconds. But it's basically a priest talking to atheists, or, asking questions to an atheist, right? It's an open letter to atheists. Now, clearly I'm not an atheist, and clearly I'm not a theist, but I wanted to weigh in anyways, because even though it's an open letter addressed to a very specific group of people, anybody can weigh in on these things, right? So I wanted to give maybe a agnostic view of how an agnostic would answer this question, or at least, as myself, as somebody who happens to like moral theory. But again, take it for a grain of salt. It is a very difficult concept. But in the comment section after the video is over, feel free to leave me your complaints, your criticisms. Hey, Steve, you messed this up. You screwed that up. You got this wrong. But leave me evidence as to why. Don't just say, hey, you got this wrong, and then leave no link to anything. Now, I do have links. Mostly go to spam filter, but I will approve it. So don't worry about that. If you don't see it come up right away and you have a link, don't sweat it. I will approve them. But links obviously go to spam a lot of times. But yeah, give me a link about why it is the case, right? And I mean from an academic source, right? Don't just give me some nonsensical, creationist blog or something. Give me something to sink my teeth into, to say, oh yeah, this is how moral theory would be in this context, along those lines. So I guess we're going to dive into it, and then I'll stop it every so often and kind of do my little analysis. Sound good? All right. Make sure you guys can hear this. I'll adjust the volume as necessary as we start, and here we go.
Atheists. Thanks for clicking on this video. It means a lot to me, really. I'm a religious guy who's devoted my life to a God you don't believe in, so you're taking a bit of a risk here that I might insult you, make you feel bad about your life, or at the very least, waste your time. I really do appreciate it, and I hope not to do any of those things here. Rather, I'd like to pose a question to you. It's a very simple question, in fact. It is more of an exhortation from me to you. This question is not meant to trick you or convert you. I don't have some super ingenious question that will somehow inspire faith in a deity, as much as I'd love to. I'd rather just like to challenge you. You say that you're an atheist, that you don't believe in gods, and I just want to know one thing. Are you a good one?
All right. So, I mean, he's obviously trying to be very friendly, very polite, very cordial. No problem there. And I don't know if this is performative or this is something, an act. I have no idea. It looks like he has a green screen, right? So do I. No big deal. He probably is a priest of some kind. He is a Catholic. I have no issue with that. I assume all this stuff is legit, right? I'm not going to go into whether, he actually believes these things, or if he's a priest or whatever. It makes no difference to me. We're talking about the subject matter, right? But I'm obviously that's some kind of monastic thing there. I mean, he's wearing a monk's outfit. But so he asks what he thinks is a simple question. Now, I don't know if this is disingenuous on his part or not. Again, I'm not going to weigh in on that. I'm going to assume that everything he's saying, he does so with principle of charity and wanting to have a dialogue. But it's not a simple question. It really isn't. It's a very complicated question if you really dive into it. And he's asking the atheist, are you a good person? Now, to answer that question is a lot more complicated than what people think. What constitutes a good person? It gets into, if there's objective morality, if there's absolute morality, if there's moral relativism, if there's moral, even if things even express moral facts. And so maybe he's asking in general, do you think you're a good person? Now, being an atheist obviously doesn't make you by necessity a good person. As a matter of fact, I mean, people know without question that many of the atheists that I know are biggest pieces of crap I've seen in the entire universe. They're worse, in my opinion, than many of the theists. But that doesn't mean that it's all atheists by any means. It's a very small minority of them, matter of fact. And in general, I get along exceptionally well with atheists. Matter of fact, I get along better with some Satanists. I actually have people that are Satanists. I get along with them exceptionally well. I actually think that the Church of Satan has some interesting things to say. The Satanic Temple is a political organization that I think has very interesting things to say and what their articles of belief are, so to speak, right? So it's nothing against atheists whatsoever. It is about, are you, as he put it, a good person? And, atheists can be pretty shitty people. Let's be honest here. But of course, that's not normative, and I don't think that's even close to being the case in general. But he's asking, what to you makes yourself a good person? Again, that could be a very in-depth question. And we'll get into what it means to be good, what is the good, moral, and some about moral philosophy and metaethics and normative as we continue on. But I think it's a very complicated question. I don't think it's as simple as he makes it out to be.
Are you a good atheist? It's a question that I ask with two things in mind. The first being related to morality. While religion in general, and Christianity in particular, doesn't necessarily make someone a moral person, these ways of life do necessarily demand morality of adherence. There is a particular code of life that one must live. In the case of Catholic Christianity, that code is one of peace and justice, mercy and forgiveness. It's a code that seeks to care for the poor and seek reparations for those who take advantage of the vulnerable. Now, Lord knows we don't always live up to our founder and have actually done some pretty atrocious things through the years, but it is our faith that at least informs us when we do these things and gives us and reminds us a moral code to live by. Okay,
so, he's putting it out there that as a religious person, he has some kind of duty and obligations to some kind of law that has been given by some kind of lawgiver that he's going to attribute to a deity. That's how he bases his moral ontology, I could say. What are the facts, right? Not how we know them, not the epistemological approach of how we know them, but what are the moral facts, right? Is there a moral ontology to be had? And he's asking the atheist, what is it about you that makes you a good atheist? Now, I don't think he means specifically in this context. He might kind of change it later on, I don't remember, but I think in this context he's saying, when you're a good atheist, you're not good at being an atheist, right? I mean, I don't know what that would mean to be a good atheist. Does that mean you go to faithless forum or something if you're a good atheist? I don't know. But I think he means as an atheist, as somebody who doesn't believe there's a God in the way he framed that. Now, clearly, in my vernacular, an atheist is somebody who believes that there are no gods, right? Which entails not believing there's a God. But he's just saying, look, you don't have a God to believe in. That would be some type of at least a epistemic commitment that you could not use God as a guiding force for your moral commitments, right? And this is one of the things a lot of atheists don't understand, that even if you lack a belief in something, even if you don't believe in something, there are other commitments that are entailed by that, either logically or mostly epistemically. And what I mean by that is that if I hold the position, either A, there is no God, or even B, I just merely do not have a God belief, it would be epistemically nonsensical for me to say I base my beliefs upon a God, about my moral, framework, right? There's a epistemic entailment there, or at least I would say more of an implicature, that by not having a God belief, I cannot rationally say that my beliefs are predicated upon God, right? And what God says. And that goes to what's called ethical subjectivism or divine command theory, that what God says is what you need to do in order to be morally permissible, be a good moral person. And in divine command theory, it's not necessarily the action of doing the good work, as I understand it, right? According to divine command theory, as I particularly understand it, it is the obedience to God that is the moral good. And I think there's a significant difference between that. Because in my moral beliefs, it's the action itself that is the right course of things that make the action good. It's not the obedience to anything, right? And there are moral theories out there. There's like, rule, consequentialism. There's other types of moral theories that say, look, the obedience of this rule is what makes it a moral right. And I think with divine command theory, and again, as I understand it, it's not so much doing the action itself, it is the obedience of God that makes the moral good. I have some issues with that, clearly, but I as a non-believer myself, I don't have that to draw upon, right? So even if you don't believe in things, it does have other epistemic commitments. At least that's how I put it. Now, I wouldn't put them as hinge commitments, but they are some type of, at least in a very nominal sense, a type of hinge commitment, that if you do not have a God belief, you cannot therefore use God as your moral framework, right? I mean, I think that makes sense.
Reminds us that it's not an option. We must strive to be good people. Now, as someone who doesn't have this foundation, who doesn't believe in a God or adhere to a religion, there is no superstructure making this demand on your life. No one telling you how to live in certain situations. Without a belief.
Well, hang on, that's not necessarily true, right? There's no supernatural or no deification, and there's no deity saying what we need to do. But there are laws. I mean, there's deontological things out there. There's rules of obedience in society that says, look, these are what we consider to be morally correct. Now, I'm not going to get into like cultural relativism or moral relativism, is that certain cultures have certain things that are moral or immoral to them. Like, for example, showing ankle, showing, a woman not wearing a hijab or habab or hijab or a head covering, right? There's some countries that's considered immoral, right? But in America, it's not. So that's called cultural relativism. And there's something called descriptive moral relativism that says, at least we recognize that different cultures have different things they consider to be moral or immoral. But I think that overall, there are some objective moral facts of the matter to be had that are objective. I do tend to moral realism. I have an interest in moral error theory from Mackey, but I think overall, I think that we can say that there are moral facts, and I think that those facts are discoverable, and they're independent of mind, and they're objective. Now, the moral subjectivist says there's moral facts, but they're not contingent upon anything we can go discover independently of each other. They're mind dependent. And even though there might be some cases of that, absolutely, if there's even one moral fact to be had, then I would say objective morality is true. It's not all or nothing, right? It's not, it's just objective morality or objective moral subjectivism. I think it's a combination of both. There are objective morals and also subjective morals, right? So, but I think we do have, laws in place that we have realized over many generations. We need to obey, or else there's going to be disharmony in the society. And I do think morals are predicated upon sociological considerations. What's the point of having morality if we weren't being engaging with other people, right? Because morality, to me, is based upon how we treat other people, how we affect ourselves in society, and how we act in society. If not, it's not the case, that we have morality because we exist. It's the fact we interact with other people. I mean, if you lived on a planet all isolated by yourself and there's no other people around, what would be considered to be immoral? Who would you be immoral to? This is why I don't take moral beliefs to be something like, if you have an immoral thought. No, I don't know what an immoral thought means to me. I don't understand that, because to me, morality deals with action, right? And so if you have a conceptual of something, no, it's not immoral unless you act upon it. Now, of course, people can differ in that, right? And I think that there needs to be a distinction to be made there about how you're looking at morality. Is it action-based, or is it something along the lines of even having the thought of something, is that evil? Because a theist will probably tell you, at least a Christian especially, would say, look, you have an impure thought, that's immoral according to God, right? I don't have that belief because, I don't believe God exists, so.
In an afterlife, there might be a feeling that all the world is futile, so what difference does it make? This, of course, does not need to be the case. Some of the world's greatest humanitarians, some of the most influential figures today promoting peace and justice efforts, are not adherents to a religion, but live morally out of a commitment to humanity.
Okay, but and I agree with that. Again, commitment to humanity. Matter of fact, when people talk about grounding of morality, what they're talking about is, what can we ground this in to make something more objective to the masses? And a lot of it's based upon what's called Unimodia, or the flourishing of humans. And so when he's talking about humanity, this is the whole basis for secular humanism, right? To say that, hey, everything that the theists can do, atheists and secular humanists can do as well. And they will argue probably better even. Some of them might be anti-theists that say, oh, the value that theism adds, or religion adds, or the God concept adds, detracts from the overall value of society. That's what an anti-theist would be. And they would argue that, look, everything that a religion can do, we can do as well. We can have these religions that make these hospitals, Seventh-day Advents, people have hospitals out there, and other religious organizations have hospitals. Well, we could do that too without the religious side. Unfortunately, the religion has the money, right? So a lot of them, make hospitals and do charitable things, not detracting from that. In science came about from religion, right? It came from natural philosophy, and who had the money for the universities? They were schools. Right? They were schools run by churches and religion. Because, hey, religion is profitable. I mean, let's be realistic here, right?
Recognition of our interconnectedness, an acknowledgement that there is something good in itself about loving one another, about sacrifice. And so I ask you, are you a good atheist? Even though there may be no eternal reward or punishment, even though you're free to do whatever you want, do you choose the virtuous path that benefits not only you, but others?
Okay, that's a fair question. The way I learned ethics was basically this statement. It's what you do when nobody else is around, or that nobody else finds out about. If you can get away with certain things and never be found out about it, is that ethical? I consider that to be no. Matter of fact, this is an anecdotal story. I don't know if it actually ever happened or not. It doesn't really matter. It's the moral of the story. Of an ethics class where the students went in for a final exam, and outside the class there's a vending machine. This is called a Pepsi vending machine. And it was broken, or apparently broken, and so they would get free sodas out of it before they went to their ethics exam. And supposedly the instructor failed all of them who got a free Pepsi out of it. Now, whether this was deliberate or intentional or not, I think supposedly in the story he set it up that way. Again, anecdotal evidence. But again, it was, did they commit an ethical act, even if there was no one there to know it was unethical? Yes, I think that ethics have to do with things regardless if anybody finds out about it or not. I don't think that a truly ethical person does things because they're afraid of getting caught. I think they do it because it's the right thing to do, because that's how they form their normative framework. And what by normative is what actions we do, right? So in ethics, you have applied ethics, normative ethics, and meta-ethics. And meta-ethics are what ethics are as far as what it means to be ethical, what it means to do moral good, what these terms mean by things like good or bad or right or wrong or obligatory or permissive or things of that nature. These are moral theories, meta-ethical moral theories. And then normative is performative. It's what do you do in this particular situation that makes this a moral act? Do you appeal to consequentialism, the fact that if you do this, then that happens? Utilitarianism, which is more along the lines of what's more beneficial to society as a whole, or the most amount of people? Does it go to the rule of law? What makes this a moral act? And one of the things I kind of tend to a little bit is something called value pluralism or moral pluralism. And I was rereading this the other day. That's what kind of brought it to my attention again, because I was like, yeah, I've always kind of had a thing for moral pluralism. And what that is a normative type of, it's normative. But it basically, it to me is saying, look, there are certain types of things that you can do that will be immoral, but for a greater value, right? Because everything we do has consequences. Everything we do affects people. And I don't know if it's even possible to live a perfectly moral existence, because at some point you're doing something immoral for some reason, depending on what moral theory you take. This is, again, very difficult for me to even understand something like the Christianity aspect of a perfect being that does nothing moral, right? How does a being like Christ in his entire life do absolutely nothing immoral? It would be very difficult for me to comprehend that, because it really depends on what moral theory you're using. But let's say that I give a commissive to my daughter, which is a promise, right? In speech act theory, there's something called commissives. And so I tell my daughter, hey, I promise to take you to Disneyland for today. This is more a canonical type explanation for commitments. You make a commitment, you make a promise, right? So you have a duty, you have an obligation to your daughter to take her to Disneyland. If you break that, that's considered to be immoral. Okay, because you have broken a promise. You've broken your word to somebody. We consider that to be an immoral act or a non-permissible act. However, let's say that I have to break that promise because I had to go to work that day to make enough money, right, to pay for the mortgage. Because if not, then we're not even going to be able to have a house to live in, right? Or food. We're not going to be able to eat. There's certain things that are of higher value, like survival or shelter, than the promise to my daughter. And unfortunately, it still makes it an immoral act. It still makes it impermissible. But there's a moral pluralism there, or value pluralism there, that makes the act that what you had to do of a higher value the morally right act to take. That's how I understand it. So it is very complicated, right? It doesn't negate your broken promise, and in order to fix that, you should make it up to her, obviously. But you still broke a promise, which is considered to be an immoral act. This is what I'm saying. For a being to never have any immorality seems very odd to me, because how do we also learn about morality? We do through trial and error. We recognize if we do something, there's going to be consequences for it. Now, that doesn't, again, necessitate us to be moral beings, nor does it mean that a sociopath has morality. A sociopath can just not do things wrong because he doesn't want to get caught, but doesn't mean he has any real considerations or moral considerations or empathy, right?
So, the world needs good atheists. Now, of course, the word good points to more than just a sense of morality. It also represents an evaluation of aptitude. When I ask if you're a good atheist, I want to know if you're good at being an atheist.
Yeah. I thought he changed it later on. So now he's saying, are you good at being an atheist? What does it mean to be a good atheist? Now, again, many of the lack of belief atheists out there didn't merely just say, look, I don't believe God exists. Okay, you're done at that point. Who cares? Go away. No interest in having a conversation with you. If you're not going to argue anything, if you're just going to say, I don't believe you, what conversation to be had? Now, that doesn't mean it's always not correct to say that, right? I mean, I'm not judging them for saying I don't believe you. For example, my arguments, let's give you like the atheist semantic collapse argument. Somebody has to know a little bit about logic to understand that. I get that. I totally understand it. And again, simple logic. Epistemological logic is way out there. It's complicated. I don't understand epistemological logic. If you wrote a logical proof and argued something using epistemic logic, I would have no idea how to read it, pretty much. It takes me forever even to parse out some things when it comes to modal logic or epistemic logic. It's very, very complicated, and I don't have the skill set to do it. But I write in a very basic level. I write at a very first-year level logic stuff. And so not everybody's had that, and I get that. So if they say, they say to me, Steve, I don't believe your proof. And I say, okay, why don't you believe it? I'm asking them, do you not believe it because you believe it's false? Or do you not believe it because you don't understand it? Those are very different things, correct? So them telling me they don't believe me doesn't really tell me anything. It's not a position. It's a psychological state. It's a psychological state that they have, that they are not convinced that the proof is correct or the proof is false. So it's ambiguous when they say, I don't believe your proof, Steve. See the ambiguity there? Now, if they say your proof is false, then I'll say, okay, why is the proof false? And at that point, they need to understand what the proof is arguing, which I will tell you right now, I would say pretty much 100% of the time, For all practical purposes, no atheist has ever said is false is able to explain why, or even understand the argument. I ask them all the time, can you repeat back to me the atheist semantic collapse argument? They can't do it. None of them have so far. But the ones who do understand it, right? Every one of them has said, yes, your logic is right, or if they think it's wrong, they really haven't been able to explain why, but they go, okay, well, we'll work on it. I'm like, okay. But now if they say, I don't believe your proof, Steve, because I don't understand your proof, that is a valid justification, right? I can't expect somebody to believe something if they don't understand it. That would be irrational on my part. Just like if somebody handed me a proof, in epistemic logic and said, hey, Steve, is this correct? I'd be like, I have no idea. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's false. I'm agnostic on that particular proposition, whether your proof is correct or not. But at least I've given a reason because I don't understand it. Perfectly fine to justify it that way. Okay, but merely just saying I don't believe you is ambiguous. This is why I tell lack of belief atheists, if you're just going to tell a priest or Christian or anybody like this, I don't believe you, who cares? You're wasting everybody's time. Unless you can give a reason why to justify your position, called a burden of proof, then your position, to me, is not justified, ergo not rational, right? In order to have a rational position, it requires a burden of proof. And a burden of proof in epistemology means a burden of justification, means that you have reasons to have the position you have. And even in the case of a non-belief, even though that's not a direct position, it is a psychological one. And if you have no reasons to say, look, I don't believe you, then is your position rational? No, it doesn't necessarily mean it's irrational. It could be irrational, but it's not justified. Just like if somebody says, hey, Steve, I don't believe your proof, and you say, well, why? And you're like, well, because aliens told me it's wrong. Well, I'm not going to consider that to be a valid justification of why you think my proof is wrong, right? I hope that makes sense.
Do you articulate why you don't believe in God in a coherent way, or you just think that religion's dumb, so use logical fallacies? Well,
quick, there's a difference between the God belief, believing God exists or not, and religion, right? There's a lot of people out there that have problems with religion. I have problems with a lot of religion. I mean, I don't think a single religion out there has it right. I think if there is something to be had, if there's some truth of the matter, maybe some religions have a piece of it and everything, but there's no such thing as a true religion. I'm convinced that no religion on earth is true, as far as having all the answers. Whether it be Catholic, Mormon, Buddhist, Baptist, Hindu, Islam, it doesn't matter. None of them are right. I will go on record to say that I am convinced that there's no true religions on earth. Doesn't mean they don't have some facts. It doesn't mean they don't get some things right. I don't know. If God exists, then maybe they all said, look, there's a God, but we're confused here. We don't understand what God's telling us. We're interpreting it the best we can, but they've all got shit wrong. Why? Because they're human. They make mistakes. They interpret things incorrectly. And either A, God is not that great at communicating with man, or he doesn't want man to have the entire truth. Right? Because if God wanted man to have the entire truth, he could do this. I mean, he's an omnipotent being. I would think it would follow that he would want man to understand and at least create man in a way to comprehend. Maybe he did so on purpose. Maybe it is a willful design flaw. Right? Matter of fact, Chester and I were going to do an episode on design obsolescence, or basically, designing obsolescence into things for a particular reason. Right? It's called right to repair, and well, that was the pushback against it. But maybe God wanted that. Maybe God made us a biological being that filters our reality in a very specific way, so we don't have direct understanding of our reality. Right? Maybe it is more along the lines of what's called transcendental idealism rather than some kind of realism. Who knows? Now, I do tend to realism, although I do accept that we do not have direct feedback from reality. I don't think we experience reality exactly as it is because we have filters. But I don't accept transcendental idealism per se, but they make some good arguments. You know what? Let's continue on.
Have you explored the depths of your mind and heart, asking the real questions of life, of death, faith, and reason, seeking to understand what this human life is really about? You just not want to go to church, so this'll do.
Well, no, and I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think that many people have sat around at least once in their life and said, hey, man, why are we here? What's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of life? Is there a value to life? I don't think all atheists are nihilists by any stretch of imagination. As a matter of fact, probably a very slim amount are nihilist. Not Nihilism requires, there's different types of nihilism, but it basically is the position that life has no intrinsic or even value of in itself. There is no reason, no purpose, no teleos for why we're here. And, I think that maybe the case, maybe universally speaking, right? The universe maybe is very indifferent to us, but that doesn't mean we can't have value within our lives. And I think a lot of atheists have recognized that, and a lot of non-believers have recognized that. That's why they have things like secular humanism, that we can still have value, right? I don't need a God to have value for my life, but that doesn't mean that the universe gives a damn about us, right? But it doesn't necessarily entail any kind of strict nihilism either, which is, again, a very radical form of skepticism. And I'm not even a skeptic. I think knowledge is possible. Skepticism in philosophy is basically that knowledge is unobtainable.
Have you read the critical atheist thinkers of history? People like Nietzsche, Sartre, Feuerbach, Heidegger, people who really ask the challenging questions.
Now, okay, I attend to contemporary philosophy. I like the contemporary philosophers, right? People in the 19th, 20th, 21st century. Going back to the 1800s and the German philosophers, I'm not big fans of. I've tried reading some Nietzsche. I've tried reading, Schopenhauer and Heidegger and Hegel and Hegel is bizarre. I don't even know what the hell he's saying 99% of the time. Now they laid the groundwork, right? But I think a lot of those people that he mentioned, because I have tried to read them, they're more into psychology than philosophy. I'm not into psychology. Nothing against it. I think it's a great field, and it is entirely different discipline. But I think a lot of the older type of philosophers, the continental philosophers, were more into psychology than philosophy, especially, or at least as far as the German ones, especially. And even though that's a type of philosophy, I'm not saying it's not philosophy, but it's a very Nietzsche type stuff. Nietzsche was Nietzsche. That I just don't have much of an interest in. I like more modern epistemological writings and more stuff like, Dr. Linda Zaleski, Dr. Burgess Jackson, Dr. P.K. Moser, Dr. McCormick, Draper. I mean, Oppie especially. Oppie is like my favorite. And so I think that what he's trying to say is, have you at least read something along the lines of these topics? If you're going to profess to be an atheist, and should you not know what the topics are? Do you not want to know what it means to believe or not believe, or hold a conviction, or to know, or to be certain? These are all very complicated subjects. Each one itself could take several weeks to get a handle on. Even certainty, there's very different types of certainty. There's epistemic certainty, there's psychological certainty, there's metaphysical certainty, there's logical certainty. What do you mean by certain, right? And so he's saying, look, as an atheist, have you at least read some of the foundational stuff? Okay, I don't have a problem with that, but it's not necessarily that important because, again, I think a lot of it is more psychological than dealing with the question of ontology, if God exists, right?
Pose thoughtful insights of the world. Or just stick with people like Richard Dawkins, people who provide great sound bites for the cause, yippee, but do little to add anything to the world other than strawman arguments and divisiveness. Yeah,
I'm not going to take umbrage of that. People know I'm not a big fan of Dawkins, but when he's right, he's right. When he's wrong, he's wrong. But when it comes to his philosophy, I'm not a fan of it, and by any means. I'm not even a big fan of his biology either. I tried grasping and groping the selfish gene and his argument for genes versus memes. I think a lot of it's phased out from the experts that I've talked to on that. I don't think they've really adhered to it that much these days. I guess it was popular way back when he wrote that kind of stuff. But his philosophy, I'm not an adherent of by any stretch of imagination. But a lot of it is divisive, right? The New Atheist, not the New Atheist TM, the New Atheist movement, which was, Daniel Dennett and it was, let's see, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins, and Sam Harris. Those are considered like the Four Horsemen. They are a lot about mockery, right? They're a lot about mockery of religion in order to show, hey, look, don't be religious, don't believe in this nonsense kind of stuff from their perspective. Not judging that. I'm not making a value judgment on that. The Satanic Temple does a lot of mockery. The whole shtick is mocking Christianity, right? But that's how they went about it, right? They're not arguing philosophy. They're not arguing, whether God exists or not. They're basically mocking in many different ways. Now, if you want to go read arguments about whether God exists or not, you would have to, I think, actually read philosophers. And I agree with them on that. Go read, like I said, Mackey. Go read Moore. Go read Oppie. these kind of they have arguments. God doesn't exist. Here's why. It's not merely gods are stupid, beliefs are stupid, religion is harmful. Okay, that's fine. You can run with all that stuff, right? You can take an axiological approach and say, yeah, religion's harmful, but that doesn't tell you whether God exists or not. Right? What are the arguments why God doesn't exist? And for an atheist to sit there and go, well, I'm not arguing there are no gods. I'm just saying I don't believe the theist. That's all atheism is I don't believe the theist. Well, then you're not arguing anything. You're not adding anything at all. You're not telling me why a theist should change their position at all. You're wasting everybody's time. And I think that's where he's getting at. He's saying that, look, if you're just an atheist that's just going to mock religion or stare in some kind of disbelief that of the arguments, and I mean that in this particular case in the colloquial sense, right? Because disbelief in logic means you believe it's false, but disbelief also in another sense means the inability to believe, right? So there's different senses of the word, and I really wish atheists would understand when you use a certain word, know what sense you're using in what domain of discourse. If you're in a specific domain of discourse and you use a word, that's how it's going to be treated. If I'm in a biological class, if I'm back in college and I'm taking a course in biology, and we use the term evolution, we understand we're not talking about chemical evolution, right? We're not talking about change. We're talking about a change of allelic frequency in a given population over time, right? So we understand that term has a very specific meaning. So in the domain of logic, disbelief means to believe false. But in this particular case, it's a different sense, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because it's happened the other day. I can stare in disbelief. That means my mind's having a difficult time, believing something. That's the different sense. And so I think that he makes a good point here, is that a lot of atheists don't add anything to the dialogue. Yes.
Have you read for yourself the works of real theologians, people articulating our beliefs in the best way we know how? Karl Rahner, John Henry Newman, Joseph Ratzinger, Augustine of Hippo, Henri de Lubac? Or do you stick with the simplicity of evangelical pastors?
Yeah, he makes a point of that too. If you want to really get into the arguments what theists put out, read those Augustine, Aquinas. The Thomism is a very big thing in religion. Understand Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways, argument from motion and first cause arguments and ontological and cosmological arguments. Absolutely. I totally agree with him on that, right? Because those are the arguments that theists are actually positing, right? And when an atheist says, look, there's no evidence, and a theist says, well, here's a modal logical argument, or here's a cosmological argument. You need to be able to explain why that argument is not good to you, why you don't accept that argument. At the very least, you can say, look, I don't understand that argument because I don't accept it, and I don't accept it because I don't understand it. Perfectly fine justification. But I see what happens is a lot of times people say your argument is wrong, and they don't understand the argument. So, big difference there.
From some rural anti-intellectual church.
I've been trying to follow the live chat, so my apologies, but I got to read this one. Limo says, funny story, 2016, Dean Esme. Oh, I haven't heard that name in years, and it could have gone longer, but thank you. Started a convo in the comment section of a YouTube video. I responded, and he said, you're plagiarizing Hegel. I said, where? Then he deleted all his comments. Nobody understands Hegel. I'm sorry. I've tried. I really have read. I started reading the Hegelian dialectics. I don't understand the terminology he uses, and it's like speaking, a foreign language to me, so...
I ask all of this not to be accusatory, at least not overly accusatory, but to simply challenge you to go deeper in your thought. Simply declaring yourself an atheist and going about your life isn't enough.
I agree with that.
Just as saying you're a Christian and never reading the Bible wouldn't be enough.
Yeah, again, if you want to be involved in these conversations at least, right? There are people that don't want to involve themselves in these dialogues, and they just say, look, I don't believe, or whatever, and they go about their days, whatever. Fine. But those are the ones that are not engaging with the theist. When you see somebody engaging with the theist and wants to have the dialogue but doesn't understand what the hell the theist is arguing, there's a problem. Go watch my review on Aaron and those Muslims that I had. Aaron clearly didn't understand what they were saying. That presents a problem because then there's a disconnect. Aaron's not arguing in refutation of what they're arguing. He's not having a rejoinder for what they're arguing. He doesn't understand what they are arguing. And so, yes, he makes a good point. If you're going to at least be an atheist and you want to have these dialogues, understand what the theist is arguing, then refute it. But don't just sit there and say, I don't believe you, because we don't know why you don't believe them. You don't understand the cosmological arguments. You don't understand the Kalam. What is it, the reason? And what is your justification of why you don't believe? Well, I believe that there are no gods, and the gods are BS, and here's my reasons. Okay, great. Now that's not ambiguous, right? Now you have actually said why you don't believe. You don't believe because you believe there are no gods, right? So
ask more questions. Read more perspectives. Be able to articulate your understanding of the world with logic and reasoning that will actually add something to the world. Because here's the thing. People of faith need you to be good atheists. We do. As a Christian, I don't want you to be a bad atheist with an unexplored mind just regurgitating fallacies.
I agree with that too. And by the way, it is true. Atheists, again, I want people to be very clear on what I say here. It's not atheist in whole, and not a generalization. The very specific type of new atheist TM that I'm referring to, they love misusing fallacies. They do not understand them. They get them all wrong. You guys have seen this numerous times. I remember one time there was one person, I can't remember who it was. The intrigued feline literally counted 5 fallacies right in a row on Twitter that they got wrong. You got this fallacy 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 wrong. And they don't want to go correct themselves. They don't even want to learn how to properly understand a fallacy to apply it to somebody else. Says, hey, look, you committed this fallacy. When you accuse somebody of a fallacy that you don't understand yourself, it doesn't add anything to the dialogue. This is why in the Great Debate community on Facebook, if you call somebody out on a fallacy, you need to explain what the fallacy is and why they committed it. Right? Because a lot of these fallacies have very strict forms to them. And I see atheists committing these fallacies, and then when they're called out of them, like straw man, atheists love to straw man. TM, right? New atheist TM. Not again, all atheists. It's a very small sect of atheists. But they love to straw man. They straw man the theist all the time, right? And the theist says, look, God exists. Prove it. That's a straw man. Why is that a straw man? Because the theist isn't saying, I can prove God exists. You're literally straw manning that argument. You're saying, okay, here's your argument. I'm taking it and I'm changing it to say, okay, prove it. But that's not the claim of the theist. The theist is not claiming, I can prove God. They're making a dosastic claim that they can justify and give reasons to, or at least they believe so, right? And so you got to meet somebody with the level that they're at on their claim. And atheists, stop straw manning people, whether it be another atheist or agnostic or theist, stop doing it. Look at what the person's saying. You only have to prove something as an onus, right? And we'll put it as a commissive. If I say as a commissive, I can prove something, like I can prove 0.99 repeating equals 1, then I have an onus to do so. If I want to convince you, right? Again, that caveat, there's a burden of persuasion to be had there. If I'm not interested in you convincing you, and I just say, yeah, look, I can prove 0.99 repeat equals 1, I really have no onus to show you it, right? If I'm not trying to persuade you. I mean, I'm justified it to myself. I'm giving you what's called an autobiographical assessment, or a self-reflective kind of thing, right? I'm just letting you know what my dosastic states are. I'm just saying, yeah, I know I can prove this to you. I know I can prove this. Not necessarily to you. I have no obligation to prove it to you, unless I make a commissive to say, I will prove this to you, right? Or at least I make it more, I will try to, right? Because, again, you don't know if somebody's going to be convinced or not. But I think it's a fair commissive to say, I will attempt to prove this to you. And then you have an obligation. Then you have a duty. That makes you a morally good person if you follow through on that promise. There you go. Full circle. What makes the moral good? And we'll get a little more into that in a second here. But when he's asking about being a morally good person, I think following through on your promises is something that is a moral good.
Questions that we've never thought to answer. I want you to be so smart that it challenges us to be smarter. As crazy as it sounds, I would much rather you be a good atheist than just an atheist. And so that is my humble message to you, from one believer to a non-believer. We may not agree on much, but that doesn't mean that we don't need each other or can't learn something from one another. We do, and we can. Peace and good to you, Father Casey.
All right, well, there you go. There's a couple of points I do want to touch. there's when it comes to the good, because it's a complicated question, what somebody means by good. And I tend to what's called ethical non-naturalism. Okay. And
Hello, Internet. My name.
Hang on. 1 sec. And so what a non-natural position has nothing to do with the supernatural when it comes to ethics. This is what makes it very confusing when it comes to terminology. People hear the term non-natural, they're like, oh, Steve's a supernaturalist. No, not by any means. Ethical non-naturalism is a position that in the meta-ethics of philosophy, that the moral good cannot be reduced to anything natural. Okay? So when I say that I'm an ethical non-naturalist, that means, or at least I tend to, I do tend to objective morality. I think objective morals do exist in some capacities once you have a grounding for it. Unimodia, again, is what I usually ground it in. Harms and benefits to society, because that's what the hell we're talking about when it comes to morality. But I do think that when you have a moral proposition, they are true proposition or false propositions. They have a truth, they're truth apt. So a sentence that could be truth apt is a proposition. So there are moral propositions. And so there are ethical sentences that do exist that express morality, as opposed to what's called a non-cognitivist, who says that there are no moral propositions. The sentence "stealing is wrong" is to them are non-cognitive, meaning that proposition doesn't have a truth apt component to it. It's not true. It's not able to be true or false. Okay, so I'm a cognitivist. I do think that moral sentences do have a truth value that can be assigned to them. Now, a long time ago, I used to call myself what's called a partial theological non-cognitivist, and there was reasons for that, but I moved away from that, and so I do think that we can definitely say that stealing is wrong is true or false. I think those propositions do express something that we can evaluate. Mackey agrees with that. Mackey has what's called error theory, that those are truth apt sentences, but they're all false, because there's nothing to be instantiated by what's called wrongness to the sentence "stealing is wrong." There's no property. There's nothing objective, or I should say an object that exists that we can instantiate that with. So the sentence "stealing is wrong," in his view, it falls into error, and that's what's called moral error theory. But when it comes to ethical non-naturalism, I think most atheists probably fall into that. So it basically says that sentences can be propositional. Some of the propositions happen to be true. And there's true about some objective thing about the world. In other words, I can go look at something, you can go look at something, and we both come to the same moral conclusion. Okay? So my opinion, your opinion doesn't really matter. There's something about a moral fact that exists independently of our beliefs, of whether we want it to be a moral fact or not. And then the big thing about ethical non-naturalism is that they're not reduced to terms as they're not reducible to non-moral terms. And what we mean by non-moral is like pleasure or desirable. So when we say that the good is not reducible to pleasure, called the naturalistic fallacy, we cannot say it is good because it is pleasurable, desirable, or I want this. That's not how we can define the good. Matter of fact, Moore would actually argue that there's no way to define the good. He would argue that it was indefinable. And so as an ethical non-naturalist, I think that when we're defining the word good, if it is definable, we're not defining it in terms of wants, needs, or anything like that. But I think it's a form of moral realism. I think it's a cognitive theory. It's not a non-cognitive theory. But I don't know if atheists really appreciate that, because a lot of them tend to moral subjectivism and deny moral objectivism. I'm not quite sure why, except they think that moral objectivism requires a god, or you're conceding to the theist. You're not. Stop thinking that way. Most philosophers are moral realists. And I think most philosophers are probably ethical non-naturalists. Now, there's many other theories out there, right? Many other anti-realism theories and things of that nature. There's emotivism and prescriptivism. I don't adhere to any of those, which emotivism would be along the lines of, it's called booyah theory. I'm not making this up. If a proposition, if you have a statement that's not a proposition, but like statement, stealing is wrong, then that is having an emotional reaction to the person saying boo, stealing. Or, holding to your promises is good. Yay, boo, yah, or boo, yay theory. I'm not making this up, man. But that's what motivism or prescriptivism would be like. Don't steal. So the proposition stealing is bad is prescribed to be don't steal. It's telling you what to do, right? It's prescribing what to do. It's prescribing action. Those are non-cognitive theories because they're saying that the statement stealing is wrong is neither true or false. It does not express a proposition. It expresses a statement that's telling you to do something as a directive, right? So those are my moral theories. So when he's asking, the atheist, are you a good atheist? And he obviously said being good at atheist, but I think he also means are you a good person? This is how I interpret ethics. This is how I determine whether I'm a good person or not. Do I keep my promises? Do I keep the things that I say I'm gonna do for people? Because again, those are important. They're commissive. When you break a commissive promise, you're doing something I think is unethical. Do you do things merely because of the fact that you're not afraid to get caught, or you do them because they're the right thing to do? If you know you can steal something and never anybody find out about it, would you do it? Right? Those to me are what ethics are. Because even though you're taking somebody else's property, they may never find out it's you, but you're still causing harm to them. This is why I base morality on Unimodia and harms and benefits. Again, not necessarily anybody has to do that. It's just you want to know my moral framework as a non-believer. This is how I do it, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine to do that. You do not need a God to do that. You can say, look, this is harmful to somebody, and this is why I hold it as an impermissible action. Now, we all know that most people don't do that on the internet. Well, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to make a general statement. We'll say that a lot of people on the internet don't think that way. They go out of their way to harm people, right? I think a lot of them are sociopaths or psychopaths, and I think a lot of them have no ability to have empathy. They base their entire existence on harming other people. But we recognize those types of behaviors. And there's something called intuitionist logic or intuitionism in moral theory. And that is the visceral reaction we have about why we think something is morally impermissible. And I do think there's something to be had by intuitionism. It's not as woo-woo as you think by any stretch of imagination. It's actually a very solid ethical theory. And we kind of understand these things. Look, most people, if you're walking down the street and you see some big bruiser walk by this 90-pound woman and just out of the blue strike her in the face, you're going to have a visceral reaction, right? I think this is objective. I think as humans, we all would have a visceral reaction to this. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody would, because some people are, in fact, sociopaths and they have no empathy. They couldn't care less. But on the average, right, I think we as moral people that have a conscience, that have empathy, we have a visceral reaction. This is where, like I said, intuitionism comes in play. That we can know what a moral theory, a moral permissibility and impermissible things are because of intuition, of some degree. Now, again, I don't think it's all-encompassing. But when we're talking about what is the good, I think that's one way to go about it. And so he's asking the atheist, how are you a good person? Okay, well, you're asking the non-believer as well, right? And as a non-believer, this is how I go about doing it. So I hope that kind of answers you guys' questions on this particular video that, like I said, somebody had promoted in a Facebook group. I want to keep this down in under an hour, so it's easily digestible. I'm really enjoying these types of reviews, and so please, if you have something that you want to have reviewed or talked about on this channel, send it my way. I will definitely take a look at it. But let's get some questions out of the way. What do you guys think so far? I mean, did a lot of this make sense? Because again, moral theory is messy. It is very complex, very convoluted. I think they should just burn it all to the ground and start from scratch. Matter of fact, even the terminology is questionable because some writings use terms one way and some using it another way, especially when it comes to objective and subjective. Just like the analytical synthetic distinctions, those words are very different in different types of writings. You got to know what you're reading. And so maybe this needs to start from scratch when it comes to moral theory. But I hope that as a non-believer, you guys can at least recognize that, one, you don't need a God to be moral. I'm just sorry to the theist out there. It's not the case. Now, theists would argue, well, an atheist doesn't have to believe in God to be moral, but God has to exist to have morality. I disagree with that vehemently. I think that's absolutely incorrect. Matter of fact, adding God to the mix makes it even more complicated. I think adding divine command theory has a negative effect on morality in some ways. Because I think that a lot of people rely on being told what they believe to be told by a deity as right and wrong has led many people astray. Plus, it doesn't give them a chance to really develop their own normative ethical theories. if I base my entire beliefs on what somebody else believes, which would be in this case God says this is right or wrong, and I'm basing my entire existence upon that. If you don't justify yourself, if you don't learn morality yourself, then what good what good is it? You're just doing what you think is the correct action, and hope that it's the best. Because again, I don't think any Christian has any justification to say, I know that this is what God wants. No, you don't. I'm telling you right now, even if God exists, there's no possible way I think you could justify knowing what God wants, because you're a fallible creature. You make mistakes. You can believe that this is what the God wants, but he's an infinite being with infinite knowledge. You're not. There's no way to convey his understanding of certain things to you. And so I don't think it makes sense for me for a theist to say, I know what God wants. No, it's a belief. It doesn't meet the criteria for knowledge. At least, again, this is my particular views on this. And they'll say, well, you still have to have a lawgiver. No, you don't. That's incorrect as well. These are descriptive things, right? Morality there's two types of things in morality. There's descriptive and prescriptive. This is called the Izzat problem, if you guys have heard of that before. Fact value distinction, they also call it. And I'll leave you guys with this because I didn't want to get into that, but got 5 minutes. There's really no any questions. So basically, the Izzat problem is saying, how do we go from an is to an ought? How do we get an ought from an is? Is describes something. It's descriptive. It says this is the fact, right? Doing this is a fact. Now, based upon that fact, how do we get something that is a categorical imperative to an ought? This is what you ought to do because of the fact. What's the value for that fact, right? Humans have evolved through evolution to eat meat. Therefore, we ought to eat meat. That's an is-ought problem. There's a gap there. It's called Hume's guillotine of what makes that the fact that we have evolved to eat meat something that makes it that we ought to eat meat. There's a disconnect there, and the whole is-ought problem is predicated upon what is the permissible act, what is the prescriptive thing to be had from that descriptive thing, and I think that. When the theist says, look, here's the prescription, right? Here's the ought because of divine command theory. It's not really a prescription. They're basically telling you what you think or they think you ought to do based upon their own beliefs and based upon what they believe God wants you to do, right? And I think that runs into a lot of problems because we've seen historically not many people in religion all agree on the same things of what God wants, clearly, right? I mean, so unless you can go directly to the source, and I might capitulate to a point and say, look, if God exists and he is the lawgiver, if I was able to communicate with that God, and maybe I'm not going to be fully understanding of what he wants, but at least the point to say, okay, this is what he's saying objectively that I can go view and validate, then at that point, then it might be more ethical objectivism. Okay, I might be able to be argued into that point. But unfortunately, I don't have any access to that, right? We don't have access to communicate with God to know what the hell he wants. We only think that we do, or at least the theist does, right? All right, quick last questions. Somebody asked, Christian Prince Ears said, Jesus said that thoughts are a sin. How does this work? If a person is the only human on earth, is Jesus saying morals are personal? Yeah, and I talked about it earlier. I don't think thoughts are immoral, right? If I look upon a woman with lust in my heart, that's not a moral act. Right? Now, is there psychological issues for certain things? Yes, I think that people that, I'm gonna fantasize about killing somebody. Okay, great. No big deal. To me, I don't give a shit if you have those thoughts because maybe you're just working them out. Maybe you're just mind playing, right? It's the action of going about doing it that's the immoral act, right? And people can say, well, what happens if these people that have all kinds of strange immoral thoughts? Yeah, well, they're not immoral in the sense of philosophy, right? They might be psychologically dangerous, right? I mean, if you look upon a child and you have sexual thoughts, that's a psychological problem, right? But in philosophy, that wouldn't necessarily be immoral because there's no action involved with it. But they do need to get help, clearly, right? But it's the action that makes something immoral. If they don't act upon it, they haven't made an immoral act. Once they do, then that's the immoral act. So I've also said that dreams are called morally inert, right? If I have a dream, I'm not responsible for any morality in that dream, even if it's a lucid dream. I can do what the hell I want in that dream. There's no immorality to be had. Now, even though you're lucid and you know what you're thinking and you know what you're doing in those dreams, might be some psychological components to this, correct? I mean, if I'm wanting to go around stabbing people in the throat, I might have to go talk to somebody, right? I mean, so there is psychological issues, but there's no more immoral act to be had because I'm not harming anything. There's no moral agent considerations, agents of moral consideration in my dreams. They're NPCs, right? When you're playing a game and you shoot an NPC, you haven't done anything wrong. Now, if you do that in real life, there's a problem. See the difference? So, no, I don't think thoughts in itself are immoral, and if that is the case, if that's the moral theory that exists, that is true, then obviously we would have to be able to objectively go ask Jesus about this and have, divine inspiration, direct knowledge, direct revelation that this is the case, that even having a thought is considered immoral according to some moral theory, right? But we don't have that information, and I don't base my life upon what is moral or immoral as far as just thinking. I base it upon actions, because I do think that morality is action based. This is why we're talking about prescriptive things. What is it you do? What is the action you take in a right or wrong situation, right? But all right, we are at the hour. I'm going to wrap this up, guys. Thanks for watching. If you want to support this channel, I really appreciate it. Hit the join button to become a member. I really do appreciate it. And I also got the Patreon link below. That is extremely important as well. It's been obviously, because of the world situation, my Patreon has obviously gone down. I totally understand it. But if you can become a patron for $1, $5, $10 a month, $1 billion a month, that works too. Whatever the nominal amount is, I really do appreciate it that you're supporting this channel. I will be doing things like this more often. Chester and I are doing still, obviously, Judgment Call, 11 a.m. Pacific time on Mondays. We're really enjoying that. We might have some other stuff that we're going to be doing. Go check out her channel. She's doing right now, or just finished the last thing on the deep dive, the Non Sequitur Show lawsuit. So go just check that out on her channel. And with that, guys, I do appreciate all your support. If you've got things you want me to review, link them to me, message me, let me know, and I probably try to do one of these about a week, if I can. Sound good? All right. Good night.